An all-new Eye on the Bay in HD starts right now. "21 of them were built in cities up and down the state, and they're studied by virtually every child in California. Brian Hackney goes on a mission to tour the Northern California missions. He'll travel from Carmel to Sonoma by car and on foot. His donkey-led expedition will uncover the route Padres took through the South Bay. We'll see how explorers and missionaries crossed our treacherous waters, and we'll take you to some historic spots hidden in modern-day suburbia. Great places to relive our history with your family. Join us for a memorable two-part missions adventure next on Eye on the Bay."
Come on, let's cross the street. Come on, Jeremy. Come on. Welcome to Eye on the Bay. I'm Brian Hackney. There are 21 missions across this state. We owe the name of what seems like almost every city in this state to our Spanish heritage. But how were the missions formed? How did you walk from one mission to another and survive? That's the topic for the next 2 nights of Eye on the Bay.
All of our names of our major cities in California are in Spanish. San Diego, Santa Barbara, Monterey, San Francisco, San Jose, Santa Rosa. It's a Spanish litany of saints.
And it all began when this man, Sebastian Vizcaíno, came ashore in Monterey. It was 1602.
They stop at Monterey, they get off the boat, and they celebrate Mass.
The first Mass that was said in California.
First Mass said in California.
2 Carmelite priests named the place Carmel.
One more thing they do, they claim the land you're watching this from for the Spanish Empire. And then Spain sails away. They forget about California for 165 years.
So what happens in 1767 that suddenly, 160 years after Vizcaíno at Monterey, the Spanish decided to move forward?
Because other people started to get interested in.
After all, the Russians had already established a village and built a fort here at Fort Ross. Spanish intelligence reported back to the Crown within a few months that the Russians were within 90 miles of what would become San Francisco.
And as these reports got back to the Spanish Crown, they said, wait a minute, we better put something there to hold our land.
And so this diminutive 56-year-old Franciscan with a PhD in theology arrived on a mule and began the string of 21 missions.
Mission number 1 in San Diego, built in 1769. Mission number 2, the mission at Carmel. Number 3, also in Monterey County, Mission San Antonio. Easily, to this day, the remotest of all of the missions.
Number 4, San Gabriel, famous because it's the only one we didn't get to.
Mission number 5, San Luis Obispo. This one's famous because after flaming arrows set the thatch roof alight 4 different times, the Padres here decided to try tile roofs. That worked, and this became the model for every tile roof in the mission chain since. Wow, so finally we arrive. Number 6, Mission San Francisco, Mission Dolores.
Founded in 1776, is the oldest building in San Francisco.
Next, there's Mission San Juan Capistrano. And you all know what this is famous for. Mission number 8, Mission Santa Clara.
Number 9, Mission San Buenaventura in Ventura, California. Mission number 10, Santa Barbara.
Number 11, La Purísima, near Lompoc. Number 12, Santa Cruz.
Number 13, the mission at Soledad. Number 14, Mission San Jose. Interesting because it's in Fremont.
Mission number 15, San Juan Bautista, famous in Hollywood for one thing.
The filming of Vertigo. Number 16, San Miguel.
Then, Mission San Fernando. Number 17. Number 18, San Luis Rey near Oceanside.
Number 19, the mission at Santa Ynez.
Number 20,
San Rafael Mission number 21 at Sonoma.
And Sonoma's the end of the line for the missions. But let's go back to the beginning.
It's 1769, you're the Spanish, you've just built your first mission in San Diego, and you're afraid the Russians are invading to the north. What do? You blaze a trail as fast as you can to Monterey, and you call it El Camino Real. So how did they build this dirt path?
You need workers. And the way you get workers is to establish a mission, Christianize the Indians.
That first mission in San Diego was followed by a fort, a presidio, in Monterey.
There's almost nothing left of that presidio that the Spanish built back in the 1770s. But this is the last best remaining example of what they built. This is the Presidio Chapel.
This church was built in 1794. It is the only remaining Presidio Chapel in California. If you'd like, here in a little while, I'll take you up into the bell tower.
So it's up to the bell tower. Wow. Oh my God, look at this.
You can turn around and you can see the ocean behind you.
Do the bells still ring? This church survived, but there's not a shred left of the original Presidio?
I can show you part of the original Presidio wall.
Really?
Yes.
That's it?
Yep.
No kidding. That little wall right there?
That wall right there.
That's a wall?
Yeah, and this is part of the barracks.
But one more remnant from the Spanish period here definitely survives. The mission at Carmel. It's where we begin our tour of the Northern California missions.
It was the first stone church built in a mission here in California, and it's built in an architectural style that's unique. It was Father Serra's favorite mission. This is where he chose to set up his headquarters and expand from here.
It was also his final resting place. The redwood fragments of his coffin are on display near the altar, the grave itself, a simple concrete inset on the altar floor. Carmel Cemetery also contains the bones of one of the longest-lived Californians. Tracing it reveals the resting place of old Gabriel.
This is how old he was. 151?
I think it's possible.
One final incredible tale. Remember that first prayer service in the year 1602?
168 years later, Father Serra is in the same spot.
Same spot, under the same tree.
And do we know where that spot is?
Yes, it's marked in Monterey. There's a monument there today where the tree was at.
I know where that monument is. It's right here on the corner of Pacific and Artillery in Monterey. By the way, what happened to that tree that used to stand right here that sheltered that very first prayer service in the U.S. in 1602 and again in 1769? It was still alive at the end of the 1800s, but in 1904, the tree was cut down by an unsuspecting utility crew. Parts of it were floated out into the bay, and when priests heard about it, they retrieved parts of it, and little pieces of that tree are on display at the mission in Carmel.
Coming up, a famous movie was made at our next mission stop. Plus, Brian hits the pavement for an entertaining 13-mile walk through the South Bay to uncover the route Padres once traveled.
It's about 20 miles to the next mission, and we're going over the old El Camino Real. It still exists. Now, a lot of people think it's the 101, and in some places it is, but between Monterey, Salinas, and San Juan Bautista, this is the El Camino Real. It's the old San Juan grade. Hardly anybody uses it anymore. It's very bumpy, it's very narrow. Hard to imagine this was the first superhighway in California. Finally, we arrive at San Juan Bautista, the next mission in the chain, which has more than just spiritual significance.
It was 1955, 41 years ago, when I first walked onto this plaza and knew instantly that Mission Old San Juan Bautista would be the location Hitchcock wanted to use in our picture Vertigo.
Mr. Hitchcock brought his stars, Kim Novak and James Stewart, to town.
Where are you now?
They were in San Juan Bautista in October 1957.
It was a big thing then in San Juan, and of course even people in Hollister. We knew that it was going on.
Where were you?
Well, right down in this next intersection down here, basically because they had all of this blocked off, and the crews and equipment and the whole bit.
Look at this. Well, here's your gray horse.
And there's your horse now. It's the same one, just kind of tucked into a corner of the stables. What's amazing is how little has changed in San Juan in the 50 years since the film was shot. How it looked then, how it looks now.
Paddling.
The inside of the church then, the inside of the church now. Hasn't changed much, has it? There's one thing that's not here anymore, because it never was here. See, for the plot in the movie, Hitchcock needed a bell tower so that Kim Novak could fall off of it. But the mission doesn't have a bell tower. It's completely naked. So Hitchcock's artists drew one in. Of course, the excitement of having the master of suspense in town drew what few people lived or worked near the mission to the shoot.
So I come up at lunchtime and thought, well, I'll come up and see all the stars and the director and Alfred Hitchcock and so on.
And who'd you see?
Not a soul. I miss seeing Hitchcock. I miss seeing Jimmy Stewart. Yeah. I miss seeing Novak. I didn't see anybody.
Dad, I'm really sorry about that. This is my dad.
Well, that's the way life goes.
Yeah. Thank you, Dad.
You're welcome.
We're going to go on from here. Okay. On to the next one. North from San Juan, the El Camino Real pretty much sticks to the 101. At Gilroy, it dives over onto the old Monterey Highway. There's a reason why they call it that. Up through Morgan Hill and San Jose. I mean, this really isn't fair, driving a car on the El Camino Real. So, when we come back, we're going to put on robes, climb on a mule, and walk the walk. When Eye on the Bay's tour of the Northern California missions continues. Welcome back as we arrive at mission number 14, Mission San Jose in Fremont. Before we embark on a journey to Mission Santa Clara, and you've never seen a journey like this on television, we're greeted by Andrew Galvin, curator of San Francisco's Mission Dolores and an Ohlone Indian descendant, who calls the parish at Mission San Jose home. Founded in 1797, it was once home of a 30-member Indian orchestra. The Mission Church today features a stunning interior. Andy's great-great-grandfather laid the cornerstone of the church back in 1805.
That church fell down in what used to be called the Great Earthquake of San Francisco in October 1868. In 1981, when this present building was being reconstructed, my father laid the cornerstone for this particular church building.
And now, Andy will take part in something very historical. He's leading me by foot on a mission-to-mission trek along the original route through the South Bay, a route the Padres took 200 years ago. And yes, I will play the role of a Padre too. How do I look? Oh, I need the sandals. Assisting us on the mission, my old pal Danny. Hey, they all traveled in groups back then too. And now that I'm dressed for action, we need something to carry the load. Meet Jeremy, a donkey who will play the part of what most likely would have been a mule or horse. Would they actually have mules, donkeys?
Oh yes, there were thousands of animals at these missions. And it was these animals that destroyed the California environment. They ate all the native plants. They ate the native bunch grass that an acorn would fall out of the oak tree.
Jeremy, did your ancestors do that?
Padres would walk from one mission to the other mission. Here at Mission San Jose to Mission Santa Clara, it's 13 miles, the shortest distance between any two missions.
Why would the Padres walk from mission to mission? Why weren't they on horseback?
Well, part of their vow of poverty and owning nothing also meant that there was sacrifice in their life, and part of that was the non-use of an animal for transportation. And you know, actually during the mission period, we've got this romantic notion that you could walk from one mission to the other, you know, leave at morning and get to the other by dinner time. Never happened. You'd make about 10-mile journey a day. So 2 nights you were out sleeping in the wilderness, as it were, camping out. The 3rd night you made it to the other mission, replenish your supplies, rested, visited.
It's a long way to Tipperary and the Mission Santa Clara.
Just imagine your journey to heaven.
On the journey, the animal would carry supplies, maybe jerky meat and fresh fruit. We stopped at a Mission Boulevard deli.
We're in the middle of a pilgrimage. I don't want to interrupt your lunch. Could I get salami, turkey, and jack cheese?
And because it would truly take forever to shoot this, we don't want to overtire Jeremy, portions of the trip were made in my modern-day mule, my 64 MGB.
Father Sarah and Father Paulo would have liked to transport like this.
But we still know exactly where that El Camino Real was, even though it's been paved over.
Our voyage took us over the 880 in Milpitas. The freeway below was once wetlands with many Indian villages.
Where are we now?
We are at Penitencia Creek, which is the halfway point between Mission San Jose and Mission Santa Clara. The town of Milpitas, the original name is Penitencia.
Named after this
Named
creek
after
right
the
over
creek
here.
right over here.
Padres from Fremont and Santa Clara would meet at this halfway point to hear each other's confessions. All we had to do was cross it.
If the Padres could do it,
If the Padres could do it, we can do it.
That's not so bad. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. The water crossing of Penitencia Creek, reenacted. Along the way, a lot of interesting stops.
Right here, the San Jose Post Office was an old Indian village, and across the street was an old Indian cemetery underneath that building.
How much farther do we have to go?
About 5 miles.
We crossed stoplight after stoplight. Our feet are killing us as we limp along Oakland Road, the old El Camino Real. And there's another hurdle to reenact.
The next crossing that the Padres and others would have had to cross was Coyote Creek.
So this is Coyote Creek?
This is Coyote Creek.
And then off in the distance, they did not have the 880 bridge back then.
With sunlight fading, we hit the daunting Guadalupe River, hurdle number 3. Here we came across the second site of the Santa Clara Mission. It, like the first, was flooded, so the friars moved the mission to its present site, where we're headed, 2 miles away.
Which means we still have to walk.
After all, if Father Sarah could do it, we could do it. And he walked a lot. Just 2 months before he died, he trekked from San Francisco to Santa Clara and to Carmel.
So finally, the mission comes into view.
Finally, we're looking at Mission Santa Clara.
And this was the 4th site for a mission, and this one did not get flooded out.
No, this one didn't get flooded out, but the church that was here in 1926 burnt to the ground, and this is a 1926 new church. This is the 5th Mission Santa Clara church.
Mission Santa Clara was the 8th in the chain, and that 4th building was erected here in 1822. The church now serves as the college chapel at Santa Clara University. I consider it to be one of the most exquisite mission churches on the inside and out, with stunning gardens surrounding it, upon which we collapsed.
I know how you feel. That's the end of the road, Mission Santa Clara. Next stop, Mission Dolores. That's just 31 miles. We'll take a car, and we'll do that when we come back. Welcome back as we've put the donkey to bed after that exhausting walk through the South Bay. But we're going to have to put the MG into service again tomorrow as we continue our tour of Northern California missions. We're going to explore El Camino Real and visit sites few know about. We've got a great place that every parent who has a child studying the missions will want to go, and we'll try to answer a fascinating question. How did the Padres and the explorers manage to press north when the Golden Gate stood in the way. Thanks for watching, and by the way, if you want more information about any of the places that we visited, or if you're a California history teacher and want a complimentary DVD of the series, log on to our website, cbs5.com/Eye on the Bay. We'll get you all the info. I'm Brian Hackney. I'm going to hit the trail. See you tomorrow night. This is what the Padres did on a tree like this some 230 years ago to attract Native Americans along El Camino Real. And they wore something like this. I'm Brian Hackney. Tonight on Eye on the Bay, we continue our tour of Northern California missions. We began our road trip at the exquisite Mission Carmel. We forged north to San Juan Bautista, Fremont, and Santa Clara. And not before we hopped on a local donkey named Jeremy. We tried to get a mule to make an authentic point. What was the path the Padres traveled in the South Bay to head from Mission San Jose and Fremont to Mission Santa Clara? And why are we doing all of this? Well, it's a part of California history studied in just about every fourth grade classroom in the state. Tonight, we continue to press north and we'll find the end of the road at Sonoma. But not before we encounter this massive, intimidating body of water the Padres somehow had to figure out how to cross, the San Francisco Bay. But we'll begin our journey on a road they walked on and one you drive on, El Camino Real. We know El Camino Real as a traffic-plagued road, a suburban utopia of concrete and mini-malls that line the South Bay and the peninsula. How sure are we that we're on top of it? Or are we just close to where it used to be?
This particular part, we're very close, if not on top.
That's Greg Smithstad, an expert in the study of early California history, namely the trail blazed by the missionaries and explorers like Juan Bautista de Anza.
Through most of the path from the South Bay up to the Mission Dolores and the Presidio, we can be fairly sure that we know the pathway.
Smithstad is an 8th-generation descendant of several members of the 1775 Anza expedition. He's showing me some fascinating historical stops on our way to Mission Dolores, spots that you probably didn't know were there.
We're standing on what was the old Spanish Trail. And both the Padres and the explorers went along this way, the way that these tracks are, and used this tree, we call it today the Palo Alto, or the tall redwood, as a landmark.
Standing at a few hundred feet, it served as a trail marker for early explorers.
They think of Palo Alto as the university or the mall, but not necessarily this tree, which actually gave its name to the whole region.
If you want to ride right on top of the El Camino Real, you need to climb on a train because they laid the trains right on top of the old Spanish Trail.
The El Camino Real that we know today, in the very beginning, thousands of years ago, was a series of Native American trails.
It wasn't the colonists that actually blazed the King's Highway. The Native Americans and animals did it first.
Why should you go make a path this way when a tule elk, for thousands of years, herds have been going through in a particular area? Well, the natives are chasing them, they're hunting them.
We've come to know the El Camino Real as one road.
But it was a system of roads that's getting people from one place to the other, the important places of the 18th century.
This is probably one of the original routes. This is an old county road, which is an original trail.
Near downtown San Mateo, we met up with John Kolstad, owner of the California Bell Company. Now, you may have seen these mission bells along El Camino Real. He's manufactured and placed over 500 bells up and down the state along the El Camino. Bells similar to these were rung by Padres to attract Indians. After all, the missionaries' mission was to save souls.
Why would that attract the Indians?
Indians had never heard bells before. What had they really heard?
There were many natives here.
The bells would have been rung in places like this. Expedition Camp 94, a historic landmark along San Mateo Creek near downtown San Mateo. If only locals living in neighboring apartments knew what happened here.
So this was going to be the site of another mission in the Bay Area?
Yes. In between Santa Clara and the Presidio of San Francisco and Mission Dolores, they needed something in between. and it was just too far to get from on one day's travel. So they were considering this as a site.
Greg and I pressed on north through South City, Colma, and Daly City.
Finally, after all this time, look to the horizon. For the first time, we come within view of the skyline of San Francisco. And you know what happens at this point? The road splits. To stay on El Camino Real, we take a left here, right?
We take a left here.
Okay.
To Dolores Street is the road to Mission Dolores.
So off we go to stay on the El Camino. And so finally we arrive. What year was this built?
Construction started in 1776.
Number 6, Mission San Francisco, Mission Dolores.
Our official name is the Mission of St. Francis of Assisi along the river of Our Lady of Sorrows. So over years, that's a mouthful to say. People took the first word, they took the last word, and we come up with Mission Dolores.
Dolores, which today might just be one of the most visited missions by 4th grade students, was once more than just a place of worship.
Often we think of a mission just as the church that remains standing, but the mission was the entire complex. It was all the shops, it was the orchards, it was the field.
Having surprisingly withstood the great 1906 quake and fire, it's the only intact chapel amongst the 21 missions, and it's one of only 2 surviving buildings where Father Serra is known to have officiated. Plus, behind the chapel sits the oldest burial ground in San Francisco, the Mission Dolores Cemetery.
Our first burial out here was in 1777. By 1898, the cemetery was filled, and so that's why burials stopped. During that time, over 11,000 people were buried in the cemetery attached to the mission parish.
In the 1930s, most of San Francisco's cemeteries were moved out of the city, at least the above-ground pieces.
The city provided the funding to remove the tombstones, but they did not provide money to remove the burials. If you had family, you were told you may move your family to Colma, but you pay. So most folks left their family in San Francisco, grew up on top of the cemeteries.
Which means the children at the Mission Dolores School play above countless grave sites, many with notable names.
Francisco de Haro, he was the first alcalde, which translates mayor of San Francisco. Alfred Hitchcock in the 1950s filmed Vertigo here. Kim Novak and Jimmy Stewart stood not far from where we're standing right now.
Today, this is one of the city's only 2 surviving cemeteries, a patch of land rich with historical tales, some remembered, some forever forgotten.
Now, as we head north from Mission Dolores, we're heading toward one of the most treacherous crossings the Padres ever had to make, because El Camino Real came to a different kind of fork in the road.
Coming up next, we have a bridge to take us across the Golden Gate. See what Padres and explorers had to do to get to the other side.
Welcome back to Eye on the Bay as we continue our mission to visit Bay Area missions. And as we retrace the route of the original missionaries, we've just left Mission Dolores on our way north to the missions in San Rafael and Sonoma. But,
wow, end of the road.
The end of the road.
the end of the El Camino Real. Well, for the time being at least, because one thing stood between explorers and the Padres and their mission, the Golden Gate. Centuries before there was a colorful bridge, of course.
And you cannot go any further. Sheer cliff, the bay. And just that close to making it over to the other side.
Mission complete?
So they got to this point and said, this far, no further.
For a time.
Oh, it wouldn't be easy to ferry livestock and cannons over the treacherous deep waters, ebbing and flowing through the bay's craggy entrance. Life in the missions was hard enough, and if the chain were to be expanded northward, they just had to find an easier way. And there were more than a couple of ways. Here's one the earlier Anza expedition experienced.
If you needed an easier path, believe it or not, you'd have to go all the way back, down the peninsula, cross the Guadalupe River, up the Contra Costa,
to present-day Crockett.
They could make the crossing here, in the much more tranquil waters of the Carquinez Strait. But specifically, how did they get across 230 years ago? Probably like this. You see, the Spanish would send launches across the Carquinez Strait. Historians think they came somewhere here, near present-day Crockett, and it was such a wise spot to pick that to this day, 235 years later, we still use it as a pretty popular crossing.
Some wanted an even easier way. Explorers like Moraga were content to travel all the way east to the San Joaquin River, near where Stockton is today, and then head north. It's documented that in 1822, a trip from San Francisco to the San Rafael Mission took 5 hours, and that was with no wind. The route went around the east side of Angel Island to Tiburon Point, past the Marin Islands to San Rafael Creek. In June of 1823, that same trip made by Father Altamira took only 4 hours, an hour shorter because there was a fresh breeze. And it's interesting how the missionaries risked life and limb to get to Mission San Rafael. When we come back, we'll arrive by car and learn how this mission was built to accommodate death. Welcome back as we arrive north of the Golden Gate to here, mission number 20, San Rafael.
It served as what they called then an asistencia, so it was a hospital.
With a high mortality rate of Christianized Native Americans residing mostly at the foggy and damp Mission Dolores, Mission San Rafael, with a warmer climate, was built in 1817 as a healing mission.
So in fact, it was really required by the Padres to establish a hospital and to get them away from the diseases that were ravaging them.
Nothing is left of the original buildings. The mission eventually came under Mexican control and was torn down in 1870. One thing does remain, a natural spring, the reason they located the mission here to begin with. Today, the spring still springs.
We're near the spring. There's the mops.
Yes.
The springs now bubble up and have flooded the confessional.
Then, 4 years after this mission is built, Spain is booted out of what would become Mexico. And San Rafael would remain the last mission built under the flag of the Spanish Empire. But it didn't stop the northward movement of the missions. A somewhat renegade priest, Father Altamira, marches north from San Rafael to this spot about 8 miles south of Sonoma, erects this cross on what is now property of the Klein Vineyards, and says this is the spot for the next mission. He builds one. It only lasts 4 months. That building marks the site of where that first Sonoma mission was built. And on this property, they have something here, a museum, within which you can do something you can't do anywhere else in California.
And it's a place every parent and 4th grade child who's ever constructed a mission model will want to see.
We knew we had to save the collection.
It's the only collection of its kind, 21 mission models, and they depict what the missions looked like from their earliest renderings. If you can believe this, they were on display at the 1939 World's Fair at Treasure Island. Nancy Klein and her husband Fred, owners of Klein Cellars, bought them all at an auction in 1996, and they opened the museum a couple of years ago.
We've had 2,000 4th graders this year that have come to visit, and it gives them an opportunity to walk the mission trail under one roof.
And from this must-see historical winery, we head up Highway 21 to a now popular North Bay Square. This is that second location for Father Altamira's Sonoma mission.
This is the end of the kingdom. Spain went no farther than this. This is the last of the mission trail. And hence that bell right there.
The last one in the chain of bells.
That's correct.
Now run by the state park system, Mission Solano, as it's known, has an impressive collection of mission church paintings, the same cacti and the same roses grown on the property since the 1800s, and something that disappeared well over a century ago.
This is a remnant of the mission, and its date is 1829. It was found in San Francisco at Sutros Baths in the 1920s.
Good heavens, and here it hangs to this day.
In the 1830s, the mission came under the control of General Vallejo. The mission properties were supposed to be divided among Native Americans, but Vallejo added the mission to his own massive holdings. And today, a monument sits here as a reminder of the lives lost. Add to these 100,000 more Indian names, and you'll begin to get an idea of how devastating the mission system was to Native Americans. We'll discuss that and talk about the man who began it all when Eye on the Bay continues.
Welcome back to Eye on the Bay. I'm Brian Hackney, and our tour of the California missions continues by arriving at the touchy subject of a 5'2" man who got a PhD in theology from his home island of Majorca, Spain. We arrive at the subject of Junipero Serra.
Junipero Serra is an interesting character. He's born in Spain on the island of Majorca in 1713. And when he started in California, he was 55 years old. We know in his lifetime, here in California, he's up and down from San Diego to San Francisco on foot 4 times. I mean, these guys were really tough guys. They were all wood and nails. I don't know of any other way to describe Junipero Serra than he was wood and nails.
It might explain how just 300 Spanish soldiers spread over 600 miles managed to largely subdue perhaps 100,000 Indians.
They had manuals of the basic dynamics, how to make friends with the Indians. Father Serra is very famous for hanging a bell on a tree. I mean, he's ringing a bell out in the middle of nowhere. Amar a Dios! What's that crazy dude over there ringing a bell and shouting? Because they didn't understand Spanish. Amar a Dios! What Father Serra brought to California was the greeting of the island of Majorca, his home island. Amar a Dios! Amar a Dios. Love God, but if you read it backwards, God loves you. So he'd be running around California. Amar a Dios, Amar a Dios. Cristianos! Just like they say of the Gospels, St. John. That old man was walking around telling everybody, love God, love God. He must have been a crazy hippie from the 60s that hate Ashbury. And so you can't beat that when somebody is convinced I'm right and might is on my side. And you just go out and you can change the world. And that's what Serra was doing. Tiny little punk of 5'2", but he changed the face of California.
But the sound of the bells was also the knell of doom for the people who had lived in California for 8,000 years. The average lifespan of an Indian in the mission system was 3 years, often for one simple reason.
The Indians didn't have immunity to the European diseases. Here in California, the worst epidemic was February to April 1806. Every child under age 5 died. Every adult over age 40 died. The Padres documented that when you saw the first spot of measles, 19 hours, dead.
But how did the Padres react to this wholesale die-off of the Indians because of disease?
We have it in Father Serra's own writings, very early at San Diego, where he states, "We have once again brought our customary gifts to the Indians, disease and death."
Perhaps 100,000 Indians died because of the mission system, some of them Andrew Galvin's own ancestors. But he separates the mission system from the man who imposed it on his people.
Well, my sense is Junipero Serra was one of these good, wonderful people in a very rotting, stinking institution, colonialism. Junipero Serra, when you read his writings, he loved Indians. He loved the idea of bringing the Christian message to this part of the world.
Spain lost its grip on North America. The missions largely abandoned. Many moldered into the mud they were made from. And while 30% of the Indians died during the mission era, 80% would be wiped out during the gold rush.
Amar a Dios! It's been 235 years since Father Sarah rang those bells. And from the comfortable vantage point in the future, it's easy to judge that what the Spanish did to the Indians back then was barbaric. But remember, the Spanish were reacting out of fear that the Russians had established a base here at Fort Ross and were on the point of invading California. That's what began the whole mission system. Which begs the question, suppose there's anything we're doing now that seems totally acceptable to us, but will make people in the future think we're the barbarians. And on that weighty thought, that's Eye on the Bay's tour of the Northern California missions. I'm Brian Hackney. Thank you for watching.